All right, it's 3 minutes after. We're going to go ahead and get started. Sarah, I'm going to let you kick things off, and I will take us on our little journey today.
Excellent. Thank you, Diana. So, like this slide says, we're going to talk about, what you can do to prepare. There's a lot of things, even for those folks that don't have CloudSuite in the front of their minds yet. You're trying to put it off for a couple years. I hear you. There's things that you can be doing now to really enhance the project and the experience and the satisfaction and success. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about, how do you properly execute? What are some things that can keep you from being successful, and how do you navigate around that? And then optimize. So the folks that are live, how do you get more out of the system? So those are the things that we're going to discuss today. My name is Sarah Wallace. I live in Kansas City, Missouri. I really enjoy being part of these user groups, and I have been for the past several years now. And I'm joined today by Diana Van Blaricom. Diana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Diana Van Blaricom. I'm Vice President of ERP Strategy here at ROI. Been around the Lawson landscape for, almost 30 years. Hate to even say it out loud. And hopefully one day we'll be doing this again in person, maybe in the fall. Right, Sarah?
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Definitely looking forward to that. So just a little bit more about the agenda. Like I told you before, we're going to talk about how do you prepare. Having a solid plan is so important. Executing, and how do you ensure success? There's a few key items that we'll share today, and we would love to have follow-up conversations with you to go a little bit deeper. And then optimize. So, you've gotten there, you've crossed the finish line. What's next? So a little bit about ROI. We've been around for over 20 years. We started off as a project management focused firm. Our founders are from EY, and they wanted to build a firm that focused on what they felt was one of the key portions, or sometimes the lack thereof, in projects, which was project management. From there, we have grown. We have not only an Infor ERP practice, which is extremely successful, what we're talking about today, but we also have what we call HIS services. So you can kind of think of everything a healthcare client would need outside of ERP. That includes EHR, revenue cycle, even some staffing options for those that might, need backfill while they're moving into their Infor project. So talking a little bit more about Infor before we move on. This year, we won Best in Class for ERP implementations. So we're very excited about that. And we're looking forward to hopefully bringing you something of value today, but also talking in the future. So a little more about the Best in Class. One of the things that class gave us feedback-wise, which was really interesting and great to hear, is that 100% of our ERP clients would buy again from us. 100%. That's really something special. So we've won multiple awards, you can see, over the years, not only for ERP, but also for our partial IT outsourcing. So you can kind of think of that either as backfill or other kinds of staffing, but also as AMS, so application managed services. So just a few of our accolades. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Diana. Like we said, please use the chat. We want to hear from you what your experiences are, and you'll see this little thought bubble at certain points in the presentation where we'll definitely ask you pertinent questions. Diana?
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, we want to make this a little bit interactive, and we've got this chat feature going. We've got a few more friends, some new friends and some old friends that have joined us online. And, just feel free to pop some thoughts into the chat as we go through. The one that Sarah just asked is if y'all could share with us some of the things that you may have done in the past to prepare for a technology project. I'm kind of interested in seeing a little bit of that from you all. But I want to talk a little bit, on the prepare side, because that's really where you can kind of begin to make or break your success. It's really important to go into these projects prepared. And by that, I mean, there's some things you can be doing now ahead of time, well ahead of time, so that you're ready to roll. And when you get to creating your roadmap and you get to creating your, your license agreement with Infor and your services agreement, that you've got all of the pieces you need and you're putting a plan together that's going to make you successful. The most important thing that we always talk about with everybody is rice, right? And it's not just a side dish. It's actually a very key component of your implementation. It's your reports, your interfaces, your conversions, and your extensions. And your extensions are things like, in the version 10 world, we had workflows that we may have created and now they're delivered with CloudSuite. We may have done some paint screens, design studio, all kinds of good stuff. And yes, Stacy, supply chain cleanup is very important, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. There's a lot of things you guys can be doing now to get ready for your implementation, or to just have a good practice in place going forward from a technology perspective. There's a lot of, we'll talk about reports a little bit more in depth in a minute, but what we're talking about is cataloging these items and really getting a good list of everything and making sure that you have a full inventory. And the reality is you should have that anyway, so that when you are introducing upgrades for other third-party products that aren't even Infor, but you've got connectivity in and out of your ERP, things you have to test, and just having a good inventory on these things is just the best practice to begin with. And there's some thoughts around how to catalog those. We'll talk about those in a little bit. And it's really important to create a roadmap that works for you. So as you go into these projects, I always tell everybody, you can have it all, but maybe you just don't need it all on day one. Be thoughtful about what goes into that first phase, right? You've got to get all the core functionality in there. But, when you get into seeing demos and you get into seeing software, you start looking at everything and you get really excited. And we appreciate that enthusiasm. But at the end of the day, there's only 24 hours in the day and there's only so many of you. And so you need to really think about what's your roadmap and what can you do successfully, have that first success, and then what do you roll on kind of post first wave to get successful. There's some dependencies in the products. And so there's a few places where that works really well because you've got to have the core pieces in first. But think about things like, your analytics and some of those things. You got to have data to be able to generate those reports anyway. So we'll talk more about those in a second. The other thing that's really important is to talk about an archiving strategy. When we talk about conversion and coming up off of kind of these whether you're in single tenant or on premise, coming off of a legacy system, you want to have everything, right? You've had this data forever and you want to have it all. But do you really need it all? And I'm going to share with you some best practices around archiving in a few minutes. But think about what you really need in the system versus what you can archive. And there's a couple reasons for that, is because the more you try to convert, the more expensive your project gets. And so there may not be a value to loading that into CloudSuite. But remember, if you're in a relational database and you have all this old history, you've got to bring all the old junk that supports the history. And so it may not be prudent for you to bring all that history over. We can stage it in the data lake or in another archiving solution and be able to get to it there easily. And then the other thing that we see really as we do this preparation, right, is to think about who's going to be on your project team. And by that, I mean, you've got folks in your organization that have kind of that internal company knowledge, right, that tribal knowledge of the organization. And it's key to have those people in some of the project lead roles. We'll talk more a little bit about what your project structure should look like. But now is the time, as you're preparing, is to talk about who's going to be on our project team. Do we have some skills gaps? Do we need to hire for a specific skill? Do we need to start getting going on some training? Infor Campus offers a ton of great courses that, they're moving towards that self-directed model, and even getting that base education through those tools is a great place to start as you get prepared for this project. The other thing we see is, I always caution people that if you're going to be on a project like this, these are big projects. There's a lot of moving parts to it, and you want to make sure that you've got the dedication to it. And that means that if you are tagged to be on the project, you may not be able to do your day job too. And you have to have an honest conversation around, what am I doing today? So I've been tagged for the project. What am I doing today? And what do I need to get help with so that I can be available for the project? Do we need to backfill certain tasks? Do we need to backfill certain roles so somebody can be, kind of the work stream lead? So have a conversation around how you really provide a dedicated team. And it might be 50%, it might be 100%, but what do we do with those other duties that still need to happen because we have to keep the lights on? The other thing that's important is having an executive sponsor, having someone in the organization at the leadership level that is going to champion this project across the organization. Very, very key. It helps get the buy-in across the different work streams, and just really kind of can be your escalation when we do have policies and decisions that need to be changed. And the other thing is going to be the governance team. Project governance is so important and goes back to those decisions, right? So when we're looking at maybe changing a policy, changing a process, maybe you're doing something today that's very manual and not a leading practice, and we want to follow a leading practice going forward. But you think, well, we've always done it this way. We have to do it this way. We're going to ask the question, why can't you change? Those are the things we bubble up through that governance team. And it's really just a collective group of leadership across your organization and project team members to help make good decisions about changing policies and processes. So start thinking about who those roles are. I'll give you a little bit more detail about what those roles are to think about as we go through this next hour. And then there's training, of course. 2 types of training. Project team training. Those are the folks who are going to be on the core project, getting a base understanding of what's possible with CloudSuite. Again, back to Infor Campus, a lot of great stuff there. When we do a project, we usually facilitate that self-directed learning. So we're doing it together. It's an opportunity to ask questions, to talk about and dialogue about what you're doing today and how things are going to be different. But there's a lot of great stuff out there, a lot of overviews and things that are 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes that you can start looking at today. And then, of course, our end users. When we go live, I'll share with you in a little bit the end user training, thinking differently about end user training, right? And getting away from any kind of document or something that we print out and having something very interactive, if you think of it that way. And then the last thing I want to talk about here is be realistic about a go live date. Oftentimes people will, say, hey, we're gonna go live 6 months from now or 3 months from now. And I say, good luck with that. You have to really be realistic. And that's why the RICE is so important. So I'm gonna take us right back to the top of this list. If you have reports and interfaces and things that need to be developed, your conversion, some of this technical work can take 6 months itself. So we want to be conscious of before you go out and communicate a go live date is thinking about what is the work that needs to go into this project. And that's where your RICE, your roadmap, and your training and having the right resources becomes a very, very important part of your plan. Sarah, let's go to the next one. Let's dive into some of these. So the RICE is really, really a key piece on the technical side. And I want to talk a little bit about this because this is so fundamental for you to start gathering if you haven't started, or if you've already started your project or you're on the beginning of it, is to be get yourself a spreadsheet. It can be as simple as a spreadsheet and start listing them out, catalog, whether it's a report, an interface, if it's conversion coming to and from, or an extension, workflow, whatever it is, getting these things down. On the reporting side, we often see people that say, oh, we have 1,200 reports and we need them all. And the reality is you may have created 1,200 reports, but at some point, there probably are a few of them where we're still sending them out and people aren't really looking at them. People aren't really using them, right? What we often find is people have tons and tons of reports, and the organization is using about 30 to 40% of them. So we have this busy exercise of creating data we're sending out, and it's not really high value anymore. The other thing is when we get into CloudSuite, it's a very different paradigm for reporting. We're not running jobs anymore necessarily. There's a few of those. But you also have the ability that this system was built for the end users. And we want to be able to give them a view, an online view, show them how to export it to Excel. They can slice it and dice it in 2 clicks. or drop the report in their folder and it's there for them, put it on their dashboard. There's other ways to get data than someone creating a report and sending it out. And so we want to be able to focus on having folks get data when they want it, when they need it, versus pushing data out, which has been the norm for the last however many years you've been on version 10. And this is where as you start planning, start looking for this stuff now, because the reports sometimes are a little bit hard to find. You're going to find access databases. You're going to find spreadsheets. You're going to find other stuff that people are using and doing that, it was a great solution for you. Might have worked for version 10. Maybe somebody still needs that data, but we got to figure out how to get it easier and have it inline and delivered. So start asking around, talk about what are the reports do you have, ask the questions. Do you use a spreadsheet for that? Do you use an access database? Start uncovering that stuff. Sometimes that one takes a little bit. And then ultimately what you're going to do is determine if you still want it or if you're going to prioritize it. So Emily's asking the question, where would you categorize the loss and add-ins on the RICE analysis? Well, there's two parts to the add-ins, right? There's querying data down to get a report, and there's using it as an upload to push data up. So if it's a report that you're just using the query as the tool, I'd list it as a report. If you're pushing data up, it becomes an extension because we're using it as a tool to actually interact with the application. So I hope that helps. Interfaces, again, this is a big one. A lot of organizations, it's in somebody's brain in IT, right? I think I've only ever come across a couple of organizations that had it really well documented to the point that they had a flow chart of here's the interface, here's when it runs, here's how often it runs, here's who owns it. It was a beautiful diagram. And the reality is usually we're too busy to create that kind of stuff. But now you kind of have to, because we got to figure out where this stuff is. And you want to make sure you've got them all, right? Because we need these interfaces to keep our business running. But it also helps us determine the best tool, the frequency, and how do we get this stuff moving on its own? A lot of great tools in CloudSuite. Are we going to use a replication set and then pull it? Are we going to use an API? If you're implementing talent acquisition, we can do an API to your background check vendor. It's near real time, right? So having your interfaces, whether it's into or out of, right? So on the supply chain side, we may have some stuff coming in to CloudSuite, and identifying if it's an import or an export. Very, very important. On the conversion side, there's a couple options here, right? There's conversions and there's migrations. And I want to talk about both, because if you're just entertaining the idea of moving to CloudSuite, Infor Data Migration Factory offers some great tools. We're working with them on several projects to move your some of the master data, map it to CloudSuite, moving some historical data, and some key pieces of open transactions, right? So open POs, active assets, those kinds of things. There's some rules around using those tools, but it definitely becomes something that saves you a ton of time and a ton of money because we're migrating versus converting and building all those tools. So, really, really important to think about is how much data do we need? Where is it coming from? And do we really have to have it in CloudSuite, or can we archive it? Because if you can use Data Migration Factory, it's absolutely fundamentally the best route to go. It will save you hundreds of thousands of dollars. And here's where I want to talk about that cleanup stuff. So back to Stacy's question, what can you do to prepare for those conversions? And this is where we talk about pre-work and cleanup. So Sarah and I will have a lot of conversations with folks around, pre-work is what we call it. And what can you be doing today? Your vendor master, your item master, your pricing files when it comes to supply chain and finance. On the HR side, your jobs and positions, pay codes, deduction codes. It comes down to looking at these and saying, vendor masters, is there a vendor you haven't used for more than, it's been 2 years since you've done anything with them? Inactivate them. Do you have duplicates? Do you have all the tax IDs? Those are the types of pieces that you need to have in the system, because some of those things become required for CloudSuite. And we definitely don't want to bring over duplicates when we can manage the child-parent relationship. On the item master, cleaning up old items in the catalog. Price files, are they current? It's not uncommon for us to see where pricing hasn't been updated in a while. from a leading practice on the supply chain side, when we look at the connectivity of all these systems, being able to update pricing all the way down to the charge master, for example, in healthcare, so we're billing at the right amount, can be a daily activity instead of quarterly or annually. I mean, think about what inflation's doing and the supply chain is doing. Prices are changing all the time. We need to be almost real time with this stuff so that it becomes current. We're billing the right amounts. Jobs and positions, are they active? Are they inactive? We do some workshops around that because there's some important things there. And then, of course, papers and deduction codes. Are we using them? Do we have 500 of them? How do we use them? So one thing that we do is we'll do a workshop around the roadmap, and then really what are the things that you need to do here. And that cleanup effort ahead of time is going to help in the conversion process, because your conversions are going to go a ton smoother. And that's why that piece is so important. On the extensions, in the version 10 world, you had to write a lot of your own IPAs. And some people have some very creative IPAs. That's the workflow. Where are those? You want to use the stuff that's embedded in CloudSuite. They don't just come forward, right? But we want to make sure that we understand why you have built that flow. If you have a special routing and approval that needs to happen, that's going to be a requirement. We may have to modify the flow that sits in CloudSuite to be able to add a level of approval, for example. So any of those things that you've done, if we've hidden fields, maybe there's some design studio things we've done. If you're using Smart Office, that goes away. Your home pages and widgets become available now, so you can easily navigate to things. And so really thinking about what have you done to version 10 from a usability perspective that we may want to accommodate in CloudSuite, but we can't necessarily bring it forward. Okay. All right, Sarah, let's go to the next one.
Sure. And one thing I just want to offer up. Oh, sorry, Diana. I was just going to offer something up to the group. And if you wouldn't mind typing my email in the chat, we actually have a RISE document that might be really helpful to the people that are attending the session. It has built-in macros, so even once you start the project, you can see how things are progressing. So all I need for you to do is reach out to me, and we'll have a quick conversation. And I'll explain the document to you, and it's free for you to use. So if you wouldn't mind just typing that in for me, I unfortunately, since I am migrating the PowerPoint, I can't see your faces, nor can I see the chat. So I appreciate that, Diana.
Yep, it's in there. So if you just want to drop Sarah a note and tell her you want to talk about RISE, then we can share our template with you to help you get going on that. Data archiving. All right, we're gonna get to some of the future stuff, but data archiving is important. And just wanted to share, what you need to do is think about what your regulatory requirements are, what your policies are for record retention, and think about where you're going to park that data. You don't necessarily want to bring it all into CloudSuite. If you have a ton of data and you want to, kind of clean things up, it might make sense to archive it in its entirety and its structure so that you can easily report off of it, but not necessarily, clogging up CloudSuite, so you can get to that new kind of nirvana that you want to get to. The thing that's important to remember about archiving and data retention is that, yes, from a regulatory perspective, we need to have it. Yes, we need it for reporting and analysis. But the more data you have, the more discoverable it is, right? So when you think about investigations, litigation, all of those horrible things that we don't like to get involved in, if you have it, it's discoverable. Let's go to the next slide, Sarah. All right, let's talk about your project team. So I alluded a little bit around that executive sponsor, and that's the person who's going to be accountable at the C-level for the project. So if you have, for example, a supply chain project, it would be your procurement officer at that level, right? Might be your CFO. Make sure that they have an understanding and they're coming to the steering committee meetings and they're understanding where you are in the project. Because they're going to help drive some of the key changes that have to happen. You want to identify a workstream business owner. So who is going to be your person that's going to be your lead? As the lead, you might be you might also be sharing with some of your subject matter experts, but then who is your business owner above that? So if you think about a finance lead might be someone who is ingrained as in the finance team, but your business owner is going to be your controller or your VP of finance, right? And then your CFO would be your executive sponsor. Your work stream lead is going to be the throat we choke in the status meetings. No, actually, they're just the person who's going to become the all knowledgeable Oz when we get to the project, and they're going to learn and soak in, and they're going to be the go-to person. Again, they may not be doing everything, but they're going to be the go-to person, the ringleader who champions this project for that work stream. Your subject matter experts are the folks we pull in that have expertise, like your AP folks or your benefits folks on the HR side. You might have a payroll lead, and then you've got everything that attaches to payroll, benefits and absence management, and 50,000 other things. So think about who those folks are that have knowledge around those processes that we're going to have to touch. And then your end user change champions. We'll talk in a few minutes about change management, and I'll give you some ideas of things that you should think about doing, because it works great when you're trying to get not only confidence and feedback on what you're designing in the system, but you create these change champions, right? So if you think about key folks on the perimeters of the project, who are some of your power users and your what I call users on the fringe that we can bring in and get direct feedback from, and maybe have them even participating in some testing cycles. Next slide, Sarah. All right, training. This is the one thing that, it's easy to push it down the road and say, oh, we'll deal with training later, but you have to think about it in the very beginning. Your project team training is going to be your folks who are in that diagram you just saw. They're the folks who are going to be on the project. You want to instill enough information about what CloudSuite can do so that collaboratively, when you're going through the design, you can make some good decisions. You'll get to the end user training, but that functional project team are the ones that need to know, hey, here's some really cool features and we want to take advantage of them. On the technical side, there's a ton of stuff, and I can't even tell you how many things. We at ROI have a couple of dozen workshops that we do just on the technical team to help folks get up to speed with managing the async queue, understanding how roles change and responsibilities change in IT because we're in the cloud. We do knowledge transfers around replication sets and interfaces and the API builder. There's all kinds of stuff that we do. So what you want to be looking for is, in your organization, if you're going to have to support the applications, who are the folks that are going to be tagged on the project? And then how do we get them some of those hands-on opportunities? It's easy on the functional side. They'll be helping with design and testing, right? On the technical side, they may be developing, right? Designing and developing. If they have some skills like IPA, if you've been using IPA workflow for a long time, you might be able to take some of those. But some of the other areas, because while you're on the project is a great time to look to your implementation partner and say, help me learn these new tools, right? There's Infor training, but then there's the practical application of that training. And that's where those knowledge transfers come into play. End user training is where we get to the end. And this is when I want to talk about thinking outside the box. When you do your project in the very beginning, you're thinking about all the processes that are going to change, right? Well, as you go through that design, you'll have an understanding of who's touching that process. So what's the process, who's touching it, and what do they need to be trained on? That's that end user training matrix. You want to engage someone from organizational development. And when I talk about training, I think it's very important to approach it a little differently. This is not training because we did a project. This is training because the tools people use in their roles are going to change. So if you think about role-based training, what does that mean? It means look at your training from the perspective of, I'm a new manager who got hired into the organization. I'm an employee who got hired into the organization. I transferred into a new role. I joined the accounting department and I'm going to be working in accounts payable. What do I need to know? You need to think about it in perpetuity. So as you bring people on, people move around the organization, how do you help them get up to speed on the tools faster and have a better understanding of how these tools can help them do their job? And that is a very different approach than saying, here's your checklist or your cheat sheet, right? So there's a couple different things you can do. But the reality is you need to make it shorter and more concise and really kind of focus on the task at hand, if you think of it that way. There's a couple of great tools that Infor offers, right? So we can have them go through Infor Campus to learn some of the basic stuff. You have the opportunity while you're working on the project to, create some little cheat sheet FAQ kind of things. You can put them on people's dashboard. They become one click away. If they're on a SharePoint site, we can one click away. What you don't want to have happening is creating stuff and sending it around. It's like driving your car off the lot. The minute you do, it depreciates. It's the same thing with your training materials. People park this stuff in a drawer and it never gets updated. Or it gets updated, but they don't use it, right? They're using the old version. So we want to have a centrally located place. We want to make it interactive, and we want to make it as easy for us adult learners as we can. Sometimes, if you have a YouTube channel, we'll create little videos. The little video vignette of how to do a task is much quicker and easier to absorb than reading from a cheat sheet for some people. And then Infor has this thing called the User Adoption Platform, which delivers inline training and context and smart help. And that's another opportunity for you to do kind of some in-context training with that tool. But it can be as simple as a shortcut or a widget on the dashboard to get to a video, a cheat sheet checklist, or even a link into your YouTube channel. Point is, think about how you're going to train people for the role that they're in a different model. Next slide, Sarah. All right. Go live preparations. And this is where, you have to remain focused and think about what do we need to do for go live? Understanding the work that needs to be completed, the effort, before going out and communicating a go live date. That's why that whole first slide where we talked about RICE and a roadmap and all of that stuff is so important. When you start communicating this out across your organization, you want to make sure that you've got good, clear, decisive information, right? Things that will delay your project are having to go back because you didn't do your homework and you didn't prepare. So just being really clear about the scope, being clear about, what has to get done from an interface and reporting perspective. You're going to get 150 questions about reports the minute you start telling people you're doing a project. And you want to make sure that when you do that kickoff, you're communicating the process, right? So here's who's involved. Here's how we're going to make decisions. Here's our target go live date. Here's what has to happen between now and then, and having a really good, clear message. And again, it goes to those preparations. But most importantly, just don't underestimate the effort that it's going to take to do your training and think about things differently, right? That's why you need to start that in the very beginning, to think about how are we going to do things differently. So let's go talk about, once you get into your project, let's talk about the execution. Okay, Sarah, you want to go forward for me? All right, so again, to engage you guys in the chat over there. Where am I? Over there. If you want to share a little bit about maybe some things that you've done that have been creative or fun to help execute that drove success, because I'm going to share a couple things with you that you need to think about. Let's go to the next slide. So when I talk to folks, they always ask me, what's the number one reason projects fail? And I always tell them it's because of the lack of planning. And that planning has to be done by a really strong ringleader, right? That's your project manager. That project manager is very, very important. Don't underestimate having a strong, focused, organized, detail-oriented individual in that role. Very, very key. They are the CEO of this project. They are the ringleader. They are going to be the one that's going to make sure things get done, tasks get done, things get followed up on. And so you want to make sure that you've got someone dedicated to the project, that they don't have 5 projects they're managing, right? Especially if you're doing all of CloudSuite, because this is a big project. And that allows them the time to focus and really do the follow-ups that they need to do. So be really conscious of who your project manager is. And, when you start developing your project, you kick things off. One of the things that's really important is to have a place to share documents. It can be SharePoint, it can be Teams, some type of collaborative library where you start parking things. And your traditional documents that your project manager will create, your project charter kind of aligns everybody and says, hey, this is what we're doing. Your project plan is going to be the detail. Of course, you plan the work and work the plan. But also your design documents, your test scripts, your test plan. You start your communication and change management plan early. Having that stuff in a central library, especially around designs, as you're working with your implementation team and your subject matter experts and your workstream lead, you don't want to be emailing documents back and forth and having 50 versions of everything because it gets into chaos really quick. Have a centralized library where you can collaborate on those documents and always have one version. And SharePoint, although, there's a love-hate relationship with SharePoint, it's got version control, which makes it really, really good for that purpose. The other thing your project manager is going to have to manage is your RAID, right? Your risks, actions, issues, and decisions. And they should be the ones that help marshal that through. Identifying those, making sure that's always current, and helping to kind of champion those things to resolution. Going to be really, really important in that project manager role, because some of those things may have to get escalated for maybe a policy change or a process change. We talked about dedicated resources, and most of all, don't procrastinate, right? When you get to your project and you think, oh, I can do that tomorrow or I can do that next week, be really proactive when it comes to the activities on the project, because you'll be surprised at how fast time goes by. You think, oh, this project's going to be a year, and pretty soon you're 6 months into it. So, all right. So how do you get momentum, right? Your key components of your well-run project. So as you guys start your project, these are some things that you should be looking for. And again, I'm going to say use the chat and let me know if you guys are utilizing some of these best practices, or if you're not, we can maybe give you some tips and tricks about some things too. One of the key things you want to have with your project is a weekly status team meeting. Everybody, all work streams together, giving their updates, percentage complete, where are they? Do you have any showstoppers? It's important to keep the group collectively together. So IT, finance, supply chain, HR, payroll. If you're doing a larger project, even if you're doing a smaller project, any of those work streams that's involved, you need to be talking to and hearing each other. Within that, you're going to have the work stream meetings, right? So payroll is going to go off and have their meeting, and supply chain is going to go off and have their meeting, AP, finance. But that coming together in that big, broad project meeting is keeping the team together. Again, identifying your gaps and leading practices. If you followed me on our ROI thought leadership, one of my favorite, not so favorite sayings is, what are the 7 most expensive words in business? Because we've always done it that way. So this is your opportunity to innovate and do things differently and be thinking outside the box, so to speak. You're going to have setup and configuration. You're going to have technical designs. You're going to have testing. These are all the activities that you should be seeing deliverables, artifacts, documentation on in that shared library that we talked about. Okay, next slide, Sarah. Okay, change management. So all of those things we just talked about, you're going to get into the designs, you're going to get into the workflows, you're going to get into the interfaces, and then we have to think about how are we going to teach people this stuff? Well, here's my formula for usability. Who are the people? What is their role? And what do they need to do their job? So when you're in the room or you're talking about designing a new process, or maybe you're trying to figure out how to do something better today, ask these questions. Who are the people? What is their role? What do they need to do their job? And then you'll understand usability. I'll give you some examples of that in a second. Let's go to the next slide, Sarah. So throughout your requirements gathering and your design phase, you want to capture what's going to be different. And I have some specific examples for you, but I want to share a little trick that helps you kind of pull this out of people, right? So when you get in the room and you start talking about a process and you're talking about, what happens today, what are some of the challenges, sometimes it's hard for people to just kind of get started. You definitely don't want it to be a session where everybody comes in and complains about everything, but you do need to understand where the business challenges are. So focus on the role, focus on the process that role is doing, and then ask the question, what do you want to start doing that you're not doing today? What do you want to stop doing because it's ineffective or it's time consuming, it's laborious, it's manual, right? And what do you need to continue doing because it's a requirement, right? It's regulatory, it's policy, it's just part of everyday life. And if you engage your business owners and your users in that start, stop, continue conversation, your dialogue will start to flow pretty quickly. If you go to roihs.com and you go to thought leadership, There's actually a quick fun little video with our avatars called Move, Groove, and Improve. And we show you how to do some more about that. So you can watch that. But the other thing that I want to share with you, and this is the nugget that I want you to take away, is think about how to validate what you're doing with CloudSuite or any new system with your end users. And by that, I mean, pull together a little focus group. So what you want to do is when you get to the point where you have a process change or a policy change, or you've got some features set up in the system, if you're doing that proof of concept pilot, go get some users who are going to be doing it. Go get your managers, go get your employees, go get your buyers, your requesters. Have them sit as you walk through what the process is going to be, the new process, and what the changes are, and get some direct feedback from them. That way you can go into your testing phase, your build and testing phase, with confidence that what you're doing is hitting the mark, right? So if you thought about it from that usability role, it's their perspective of, is this going to be easy for me to use? Sometimes when we're too close to the project, we forget. And I'll give you an example of that. Home pages and widgets are a great way to get to stuff really quickly, right? We've got these devices now. You can download In4Go. It's deployed with a QR code. Really easy to do. You can put some of your widgets here too. But think about where you put those widgets. So even on your home screen, when you have widgets, you want to get this feedback from the users, because you might put some widgets on there and you might put them up front. And to the end user, they're like, well, I don't really do that very often. I would rather have this one up front and center. Very, very high value, low impact things that you can do that drive usability and user adoption. So just one example for you. Now, to that same aspect, think about how people's roles are going to change and how they're going to do things differently. How will their work change afterwards? Their role might change. If you're leveraging CloudSuite, it probably will. They might actually get to do their job instead of doing a lot of data entry or manual effort. So focus on the process and what's going to change, and grab onto those little nuggets. And sometimes you might have to update their job description too. So, it's not often we don't do that, where people's roles change a little bit. And again, they're able to do the job they were hired for instead of creating all this data. Sarah, I'm going to have you go to the next slide, because I want to show you some examples of how you communicate these changes. So when you're in these design sessions and you're in having conversations around process and design, really thinking about what's in it for me. So Sarah, I'm going to have you just page down real quick, because I want to focus on this benefits to the organization column here. When you're coming up with a change, think about it from that user perspective and what's going to change, right? So being able to capture, we're eliminating, we're automating, specifically for the person in the role. When you do this as you're in those design sessions, this becomes a very, very useful tool down the road, and you don't have to go back and try to figure out what's changing. So huge win for you to do that. Okay, let me run through the rest of this real quick for you. I think a lot of the good nuggets. Testing, right? Don't underestimate the power of testing. You've got to be able to do testing all together, but this is also a great place where knowledge transfer and learning happen. So focus on having some good dedicated testing cycles. And I know sometimes it's tough to do that when the real world is going on, but what I suggest is you take certain times of the day, certain days of the week, and you always dedicate that to project activities. Okay, next one. All right, how to optimize. Again, if you want to pop some thoughts into the chat, if you're currently on CloudSuite and you're looking to optimize, would love to know that too. Just wondering kind of where you guys want to go next, if you're looking at doing some optimizations per se. Go live.
Hey, Diana,
really,
I did want to do a time check. We had you till 11:45.
Oh, okay. I'll wrap.
Are you able to do just a couple minutes wrap up? Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. See, I love this stuff. I can talk about it all day. Think about go live as being just the beginning, right? When you think about getting live on your core pieces, you want to be sure to think about what comes next. And when you're live and that first couple of weeks, couple of months, you have the opportunity to capture those things. You want to catalog them, right? And again, just like you cataloged your rice, you're going to catalog what is the enhancement. We're going to work those enhancements. You also want to work in the Infor updates that are going to come down. And that's where you go back to those business owners and you go back to those executives and you say, here's some new things we want to do. And you create kind of a mini project with it. Having some control over that chaos starts with getting it written down so you can plan the work and work the plan. So I'll leave you with that. Change control, I think, is another big thing. We do actually have on our website a presentation around managing the updates and some change control. But I will offer that Sarah and I are easily available. If y'all want to shoot us an email and you want to dig into some of these topics a little bit more, we would love to talk to you more. As you can tell, we're a little passionate about this stuff. But really, just we have a fantastic team here, and it all goes into getting that class ready, and being number one in ERP implementation is something that we are very proud of. And it's because of the diligence and the expertise that we bring to the table. So we'd love to share some of that with you. If you want to do that, just send us an email. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. And everybody, I appreciate you joining. And you can head over to the wrap-up session with the prize giveaways next. That's our last thing for the day. But thank you, Diana and Sarah. We appreciate it. Bye.
Bye.